Good afternoon. And today we're speaking with Jim McDougall at Outfield Technologies. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Tom. Great to be here. Thanks for having us on.
Not at all. Absolutely our pleasure. So, first off, for anyone listening who doesn't know about Outfield, do you want to just give us a little bit of a kind of background to the organization and what you're doing?
Absolutely. So, Outfield, we really believe that the future of agriculture lies in agri-data. And I can sort of explain more about where that came from. But what that means for us is that growers really need to understand what's happening in their production so that they can make precise interventions, so they can make the most food possible using the least inputs. And so we've spent several years working towards a product that we now got at market, and that's focused on the fruit sector. So there's a $200 billion sector where we're dealing with big three-dimensional canopy structures where growers will send people to go and look at maybe 10 trees in 10,000 to try and assess how many fruit they're making, to try and make decisions about where to deploy agrochemicals, to try to maximize their yields, and to try and prime the whole supply chain by forecasting what they'll make. This obviously doesn't give them particularly good results because although they do amazing things with that very limited data point, they really need more data to be making better decisions. So what we do is we ask them to buy an off-the-shelf drone. It's their drone. They can get one off Amazon Prime anywhere in the world tomorrow morning. And then we send that drone a flight plan so that they can walk into the orchard and press two buttons. They can survey their crops in 20 minutes. They send us pictures of the trees, and then we analyze those using amazing machine learning systems built by people at Outfield, much cleverer than I am, which then tells them how many fruit they've got per tree or how many blossoms they've got per tree, tells them about what their yield's going to be, and tells them about what interventions they should make to maximize their outputs and to minimize the sprays and fertilizers, agrochemicals, and irrigation that they need to get what they need out of the orchard. This also primes the whole supply chain because at the moment, yield estimates tend to be off by about 20%, even on the day of harvest, allowing them to sell with confidence and sell at premium prices, get the fruit where it needs to be in the world. We can also, well, actually, I'll leave it there for now.
No, absolutely fascinating. So obviously you're focusing primarily on the fruit sector at the moment. I'm sure we can come on later to where you see yourselves going in the future. And firstly, I find it really interesting that not only are you helping the growers, but of course, as we know, particularly in the fruit sector, like the specific size of fruit is a big thing for the retailers, and giving growers the ability to help forecast that not only allows them, I'm guessing, to work most effectively with their buyers, but also plan what they can do with fruit that might not necessarily fit into the quite strict size and quality requirements. So
absolutely, and there's a real catch-22 in the industry that around about the time that they know what they'll have by the end of the season is around about the time they can't make any interventions anymore. You can do things to change the size, the grade, and the quality of the fruit, but by the time you know, it's usually too late. So that's a tool that we're really giving growers to be able to get in early to make interventions. And obviously, the sector's under so many pressures at the moment that the more efficiently they can be doing things, the closer they can get to being profitable. Everyone's better.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly on that. So obviously, I think we all know that the labour crisis, or however we want to term it, is something which is an ongoing problem. Is going to be again a problem this summer. Is that going forward? Is being able to use your technology potentially in something like helping to more optimize where pickers are going? Is that an area that you're looked at?
Yeah, and labor is definitely something that we can help with. It's not our primary focus, but knowing, as you say, where your fruit is, how much fruit you've got, deploying that labor most efficiently and most effectively, having it all pre-planned, having your bins to pick in the right places, all that's really valuable. But where we're putting a much bigger dent is around things like precision spraying, which reduces the need to have labor interventions throughout the season. So if we can get blossom thinning exactly right using chemical applications, then you don't need to send people around to do fruitlet thinning, which takes days and costs thousands and thousands of pounds per hectare.
Yeah, So, I mean, do you want to explain a little bit about the kind of theory around the blossom slimming and how that has an effect on kind of fruit count and fruit yield?
Absolutely. So I'm not an agronomist, so any agronomist listening can respond in the comments. But in a very brief, apple trees in particular are biennial, which means that they turn on and off seasonally. One year they'll produce a lot of blossoms, which means they produce a lot of fruit, and the following year they'll produce very few. But it's very unpredictable, and different trees in the orchard will respond differently. In fact, if you leave an orchard alone, they tend to go into a zebra stripe pattern where they'll have trees on and off next to each other. Now, what this means is for a tree that's got too many blossoms, they'll wind up with too many fruit on the tree, which come out too small because there's not enough energy to grow the fruit. And the reverse applies as well. But exactly as you said, we're aiming at a very narrow band for what size fruit we want. And that's not driven by supermarkets being dastardly. It really is just what consumers will buy. Here in the UK, we have a band that's smaller than the rest of the world, where we like slightly smaller fruit because that's just what we're used to. Whereas if you go over to the continent, you'll see they prefer much bigger apples, and that's what they have to aim at. So if we can get the right number of blossoms on every tree early in the season, give you a nice homogeneous orchard that's same all the way across, not only can you treat that all as one complete thing, which allows you to be more efficient with how you're managing your orchard, but it also allows you to get more fruit on grade, on the correct size, quality, and color at the end of the season.
Yeah, it's amazing. So I just want to pick up on something you mentioned at the beginning, which I think is really important. And that was the fact that you developed your technology to be able to be used with off-the-shelf drones. I think one of the things that we've seen at Agri-EPI a lot is making sure, the importance of making sure that farmers at all levels are able to, who are interested in using these kind of technologies, are able to access them. And of course, when hardware comes into play, having customized and very expensive hardware can be really limiting for that, particularly with kind of cutting edge technologies like this. So obviously you've made this very wise decision to make yours available for off the shelf drone products. Is that kind of leads into, be lovely to hear a little bit about kind of how Outfield got started and what the kind of story is in terms of development to where you got to this place now.
Absolutely. All credit for that idea goes to the other founder of Outfield, Ollie Hilborn, who's an aeronautical engineer by background, and now obviously been running Outfield for 6 years, does a lot of work on the development and operational side. And he was very aware very early on that in order for these kind of solutions to have the impact that we want them to, it's got to be impact through business, not impact all business. So it's got to make commercial sense. It's got to be scalable. And also it's got to be scalable, not just in the first world where we've got, the ability to deploy big robotic systems in field or pay for trained pilots to come out and use specific systems, but it's also got to be deployable in a third world or in developing economies where we still have fruit production. There's South America's a huge fruit growing region, but they might not be willing to deploy that kind of technology. So he planned right from the very get-go that all of this would be working using off-the-shelf hardware. Hardware's hard, and the drone technology has really burst forth over the last sort of decade or so. If you go back 10 years, no one knew what a drone was. Now your son's probably got one, right? And so because of this, I mean, growers we speak to all around the world already have a drone that they can just deploy right away, sitting on their shelf. And so we're just finding a good use for them. On the other side of things, where the idea kind of formulated was I was working in private equity, looking at people buying and selling things like chemicals facilities. And so we were trying to assess the impacts, the environmental impacts of, say, farmland around that. I'd often speak to farmers all around the world and say, what did you spray last year? And they'd say, hey, Bob, what did we spray last year? And I'd realize that they're talking about a $10 million facility that deployed $500,000 of chemicals last year. And Bob might know where they put those chemicals. The cutting edge of technology in some parts of the world really is the pen and paper. And so with Ollie's understanding of what was possible with this technology and what you could do with surveying techniques, and my understanding of what was really happening on the ground, we sort of put these ideas together and started to explore ways of getting more data out to growers to make things more efficient. We had a quick look at our history and looking at previous agriculture revolutions and what happened in the 60s and 70s with the Green Revolution, making more food, feeding more people but in that case, using a lot more agrochemicals and using plant breeding. We're now facing that same challenge again, but it's even harder this time because we've run out of horizons and we're running out of the ability to deploy chemicals. We've now got to do even more using less. And that's why we really think that data, a lot like a lot of the other people that you've spoken to on the podcast, actually, we really think that agri-data is the future of this whole sector.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you a lot on that. But what I really love about what you and some of the other organizations, for example, Drone AG, who are working very similar, but in the arable, and have sensibly also built their technology to work with off-the-shelf drones, is again making this stuff easily accessible for farmers to use without having to become technology experts or spend a lot of money. And so on that, like, you guys have thankfully kind of at a almost, well, you're commercial now.
Yep.
It'd be really wonderful to hear about maybe some examples of growers that you've been working with and how the technology has been helping them.
For sure, yeah. So we are commercial now, as you say, and we've got clients sort of on a trials basis deploying this around the world this season, with a view to really going to a big international launch next year. Everything we're doing now is scalable. Everything works through a pipeline. We're processing orchard data without having to touch it, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
It's a huge change for us for the last couple of years. But yeah, in the UK, we're working with the UK's biggest grower, which is AC Gotum. We've been working with some very forward-thinking, fantastic growers like AC Hume for several years now, and working with the research bodies as well, which is great. And also working with producer organizations like Avalon, who do or Agpo, as they're now known. They do the sales and marketing for a lot of growers. So they really care about this data as well and understanding what's coming down the pipeline. We've also now got growers in Michigan, New York, in Italy, and South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, and Chile. So although, sort of early tests and trials in different markets, it seems like there's a real pull to get this technology out there. And just last month in South Africa, we started embedding the data that we're producing, the maps that we make, into precision spraying robots. So this is another sort of step change for what growers can do with this data, that it allows them to put the right amount of agri-chemicals, the right amount of fertilizer in this case down, in the right places to deal with the variability that's in the orchard, to produce the right amount of fruit and get it on grade without having to spray where they don't need to. For these growers in South Africa in particular, the cost of fertilizer has gone up 4.5 times in the last year, which means that it can, it can take their orchards from being in the black to being in the red. They either have to choose to not spray and then they lose quality, or to spray and then they lose cost. So we can help them in this case put down half as much fertilizer in half the time, really improving the profit margin for them.
So that's really interesting, and we might be going off a little bit, but you talked about obviously precision spraying, integrating your data into robots, which I think is a really neat solution. Obviously, in the UK, we aren't able to use drones themselves for spray applications. Now, this is something which we as an organisation, Agri-EPI, and yourselves are speaking with HSE and others to try and work out how we can kind of shift that policy. But you're in an enviable position now of working internationally and in both hemispheres, which obviously doubles the amount of seasons that you get to test your technologies, and it's great. Is that an area that of drone applied spraying? Is that, given that you're working in markets where that's potentially they're more lenient to that? Is that something you're excited about? Is that an area that you see things going?
We really strongly believe, and always have, that there's not going to be one company that wins this space. It's going to have to be a collaboration with other people. And there are people out there who are doing amazing things with drone spraying, and we're really happy to sort of defer to them as the experts on that. Our feeling on it, at least at the moment, is that drones are very, very good at carrying light things like photons. So they're very good at taking pictures. But once you start carrying, huge amounts of agrochemicals around, that's less their forte. And the time pressure is not the same there either. So we think for certainly the big sprays, for doing things like, for putting down fertilizer or, PKN, things like that, that's probably better served by having a ground-based system. The risk is lower, the complications are lower, and it can just trundle through the orchard day and night and do that. However, for some things like targeted interventions for pest and disease, that's a really hard problem, and we don't think anyone in the world is even close to doing good pest and disease detection just yet. Once we get there, I really think that is a good application of targeted drone sprayers to go and take out 8 trees worth of codling moth or whatever it is.
And is that, do you think that the detection is because there just aren't large enough data sets, or it's too hard to kind of capture the right imagery, even with drones to detect that over kind of large orchard sizes?
In our background as a company, we started out doing sort of consultancy, working with plant scientists to do all sorts of machine learning solutions, and so we had a bit of a dabble with sort of early disease detection stuff. There's several big barriers to how that technology sort of needs to get to in order to be effective and efficient. The first biggest one is how you actually detect a disease, and if you look at how it's done at the moment, agronomists walking around the orchard really are kind of waiting to see the trees being damaged before they make an intervention. You can catch some diseases early, and there are signs of them, but it's really down to luck. So it's about having that incredibly high resolution data, which is assessed at almost a leaf by leaf level for things that are incredibly subtle to notice. The other thing that we've definitely noticed is there's indicators of things like plant stress, and so you can use things like NDVI, which people have been talking about for almost 2 decades now, using infrared light or thermal cameras, things like that. But then your big problem is diagnosis. And so although you might know that half a dozen trees are stressed, I mean, the incredibly multivariate inputs to an orchard can cause that through heating, soil, wrong applications of chemicals. You can have just trees being out of whack for a year, pests, diseases, all sorts of things. And so getting really down to what's causing tree stress, and then getting into what pest and disease control you need to deploy, it's a very, very hard challenge. And I have a lot of respect for people that are out there trying to do this. And actually, we're talking with Agri-Epicenter at the moment about a grant application to do exactly that. But there's a lot of ground to cover, I think, before that's a commercially ready solution.
Yeah, no, definitely. And yeah, no, I know we're excited about that application. So just to go back again to talk about data, I think we're in agreement that data is so important in this sector, and again, not just at a farm level, but all the way through the food value chain. This is a bit of a hotly debated topic, and an area that we've seen as well sometimes is farmers can't make a lot of use of raw data. And Absolutely. There's been a lot of solutions out there that are providing farmers with a lot of raw data. How at Outfield are you working with farmers? You're obviously making it very easy to deploy and very easy to collect data. What are you doing to help give farmers kind of insights and then potentially consultation on that, so that they can best work with agronomists and others and themselves to kind of find solutions?
I really agree with this, by the way. I think it's a perfect topic. And I think for anyone who's listening, who's sort of starting or working on an agri-tech solution, one of the best bits of advice we've ever been given is just spend more time with the clients. You are not your client, right? And you cannot know, even if you might be one of your clients, what all of your clients want to do. So that's kind of really where we started with this. We're spending quite a lot of time with growers, first in the UK and now in other places, really getting to understand where their pinch points were. With the type of imagery that we gather, sort of looking into the orchard at a 45-degree angle and taking 200 trees at once, we've got incredible resolution and incredible depth of data in that imagery. And so there were many different things we could have focused on to try and assess from that. Is it going to be foliage mapping, tree height? Is it going to be vigor assessments? And so by working with the growers, we focused and focused and focused again, down to getting the fruit assessments right first. Because that, for every grower, is the data point that they care about. And you'll talk to a grower any time of the year and they'll tell you what they're worrying about right now. I'm worried about my blossoms. I'm worried about my fruitlets. I'm worried about my spraying. I'm worried about my harvest. But all the way through, they're worried about what my yields are going to be and what my fruit's doing, because that really is where this all comes down to. Yeah. So for us, we decided to focus on a data point that the growers are already trying to get, and getting it to them better, getting it to them more efficiently, getting it to them with confidence, getting it to them with consistency. And that goes for the fruit, that then goes for the blossom and the yield assessments as well. And that's really where we focus to start.
Yeah, I mean, it's lovely to hear that. And, and it's not surprising given that we work together. But at a core of the philosophy at the Agri-EPI Centre is exactly what you've talked about there, which is making sure that we are working as closely as possible with the people at the front line, at least at a farm level, which is farmers, producers, growers, stockmen, and making sure that they are explaining to us what the key challenges are for us both at the Agri-EPI Centre and yourselves as tech developers, academics, innovators, entrepreneurs, to most appropriately find innovative solutions to those problems, and trying to keep that relationship as close as possible. And I think the most successful organizations that we've seen are the ones that kind of put that at a core, as you obviously have done.
Absolutely. And I guess I know a lot of your sort of listener base are already in this sector, but I guess anyone who's not or is just coming into it, we've definitely found that growers and farmers everywhere really are business focused, because they've got to be. The ones who aren't go out of business. They operate on a single digit profit margin. On a good year, they'll make 9%, but on a bad year, they'll make minus 2%. But as soon as you can get that aligned, as soon as you can get sort of, into the same mindset of making sure that you're improving their business, we found growers to be very giving with their time, with their resources, to be very visionary and forward thinking. I think that stereotype of growers being kind of backwards and crotchety, sort of old men is not really true anymore. I think certainly the ones that are still around tend to be very business focused, but also very technology focused and very excited about the future.
Yeah, definitely, and that's certainly something that we've seen as well, both within our satellite farm network and also the wider kind of farm tech circle community that we've been fostering. And also, if I'm sure you were at Groundswell recently, you only have to go somewhere like that to see that you've got a lot of the farmer community that are both technically savvy, but also looking towards kind of how these things can help sustainability, and dare I say it, regeneration, which would be a nice segue to have a chat about how you see Outfield Technologies helping growers with kind of pushing forwards toward more sustainable systems.
Definitely. And we really think that this is the direction the whole industry is going. Certainly in the horticultural sector, we're seeing now there's been a lot of sort of mergers and acquisitions of different orchards, and we're seeing sort of orchards becoming larger and sort of bigger players in the space, and that's partly for business reasons. It's to make them profitable, but that means that growers often now have a data lead or an innovation lead in house, which is something that's only been true in the last sort of 10 years or so, and before that would be completely unthinkable. And that's really ties into where we're taking the business and where we're hoping to drive the sector in general. We've got this kernel of truth that we really think sits at the center of what's happening. And as I said earlier, from the imagery we get, there's so much more that we can extract. And so really building out a solid understanding of what's happening in your orchard, we can now start pulling in other data sets as well. And so we're bringing in things like weather data on a grant funded project right now. And we've got other ones that we've got in the pipeline that are looking at bringing in what you've been spraying, or bringing in data about sort of, what you've harvested and what the yields were previous years. Soil data as well. By putting this all together, although I don't like the phrase much, we're really working towards a digital twin of the orchard. Yeah. The idea here is not just to tell you what's happening right now, and not even to tell you what's happening in the future, but also to help you to assess what interventions you could make to optimize different factors. So if we're talking about optimizing your profitability, if you put down certain chemicals, if you put down certain treatments, what will the impact on the end of your year be? And then we can also start looking at including other objectives in that. And as you were mentioning just now, sort of sustainability is really a big driver. And I think you were talking to the guys at Agri-Sound last week about this too. Great podcast, really enjoyed that one. We looked, you were saying with them exactly the same thing. As you were talking about last week with Agri-Sound, there's a real push from the consumers and from the industry to get better control over environmental damage and environmental impacts. And so that's something that we can really help growers to do, to really help them to sell their fruit, to put themselves in a better position in the global context.
Yeah, that's really exciting. So what are the next big projects? You mentioned a couple of grant funded projects you're working on. I believe that you've got potentially some funding rounds coming up. It'd be interesting to hear what kind of the next big steps are for Outfield.
Absolutely. So having done this season, we've had fantastic results from our growers. We've done several hundred orchards, as I say, across 5 continents now. And a lot of that's just running itself automatically, which is amazing. And so in terms of where we want to take that next, we're doing a big commercial international launch during next year to really get this technology to as many growers as possible, to really help them to manage their crops more effectively, be more profitable, be more efficient, and be more sustainable. A big part of the funding round that we've got coming up, we're looking at raising £4 million by the end of this year to really drive that international growth, to put a presence in various different parts of the world. But the other side of that is that we are also building out more technology on top of this. So having really nailed blossom mapping, fruit counting, and yield estimation, there's so much more that we can do with the data sets that we've got. And so now we're building in fruit sizing and some color assessments. We're looking at vigor assessments of the orchards. We're looking at tree foliage mapping, and also working with other companies to bring in other data sets and really build out a much bigger picture about what's happening in the orchard. Our dream for this is that in not many years' time, a grower can wake up in the morning, look at his iPad, and see what the recommendation for spraying is for today, based on drone flights that have already happened with drones self-launching out the box earlier in the morning. He can look at the ones that he wants and say go, and robots will self-launch and go and spray the orchards. And the ones that he's not sure about, he can send that data across to his agronomist, who can look on their pad and say yes, no, or maybe even drill into specific images, look at the high resolution data, try and work out why these recommendations have been made, and then adjust it as they see fit. We're never going to replace the grower in the orchard. They know more about their orchards than we ever will, but hopefully we can give them a good set of tools here that can really help them to maximize their objectives from their orchards.
Well, this is it. And I think, I've had a similar conversation with Kip Franklin, who was one of the team at Handsfree Farm. And, the way that he puts it and obviously there's a robotic solution around automation, and much more about arable. But I think, he as a farmer and most of the team have always said they're not looking to try and remove the farmer or the grower from the equation. What they're trying to do is to use technologies to augment what those guys do, and also to free up their time from laborious and boring tasks like sitting in a tractor, and give them more time to be working on insights, to be thinking about sales, marketing, how to manage the teams better, and to make best use of their exceptional talents and knowledge.
Couldn't agree more. And we really think, growers have to be so many different people all at once. They have so many hats they have to wear. They have to be a plant scientist, they have to be an employer, they have to be an entrepreneur, they have to be a negotiator, as well as a landowner and all these other things. And so we want to try and make some of those tasks easier, take some of those tasks, offer them if we can, but also without making them need to be an international businessman or a technological visionary in order to make that happen. So it's about user operability. Most of the growers I work with are incredibly smart people. Never play poker with them; they'll take all your money, but they might not necessarily be engineers as well. They might not necessarily have they have large thumbs, so making it easy.
That's it. We already expect farmers and growers to be so many different things. Expecting them to be data scientists, engineers as well is unreasonable. So obviously you mentioned the funding. I'm assuming therefore if there's any VCs listening, you'd be interested to have a conversation. But within our more extensive kind of audience and member network, are there any other people that would be useful for you to speak to, or you'd be excited to speak to for collaborations or anything else?
Definitely. The two that spring to mind immediately, obviously any growers or any fruit sellers that are interested in talking more about how we can make this work with you. It's always great to have a chat, even if it's to know that this isn't something that you want. But so far we've had really positive response. Do give us a call or get in touch with us through LinkedIn or email. But also anyone, as you say, who thinks they might want to collaborate on this, in particular precision intervention systems for in-orchard or other data platforms. We aren't particularly precious about this. We don't think that just one player is going to win the space. There are a few out there who are being very tight-lipped about their data. We're quite happy to share, to collaborate, to integrate, because we think that's how we get the best solution to the grower, and that's the most important thing from the very top. So yeah, anyone, especially with precision spraying systems, who wants to use more of Outfield's data to help their growers get more out of what they're doing, love to have a chat.
Amazing. Well, look, Jim, thank you so much for taking some time to have a chat. It's been really interesting, especially to get some of the updates on kind of the latest stuff that you've been doing and where you're planning to go. I mean, is there anything else you'd like to say before we kind of wrap it up?
Only that this is a fantastic space to be working in. It's a real pleasure to be working with growers. It's incredibly exciting at the moment, and I guess for any young people who might be listening, do consider agriculture as a viable career path now. It's not just living behind the steering wheel of a tractor anymore. There's incredible things happening with machine learning, drone systems, AI, data, and saving the world. And so, yeah, if anyone wants to reach out and talk more about that, always happy to.
Absolutely second that. Absolutely second that. I think it's one of the most exciting things about technology taking such a center stage in agriculture and food. It's really opened it up and changed the cultural perceptions.
Definitely. And thanks so much for having us on. It's been a real pleasure.
Not at all, Jim. Thank you. Bye.